So you are being recorded now. And here we go. So April 17th, today's devotion is John 6:63. It is the Spirit who gives life. The flesh is no help at all. The words that I have spoken to you are spirit and life. So it is the Holy Spirit and not our own actions and our own flesh, because that will take us askew. Any comments about that particular verse? Okay. So normal administrative items, I don't think this has changed since the last time. Let's see. So Monday, April 20th is the quiz on chapter 10 and 11. Wednesday, April 22nd is your implementation, which is screenshots and a wall. Friday, April 24th, quiz on chapter 12. And Monday, April 27th is the quiz on software and application development agreements, which we will discuss today. Any questions? Okay. So moving on. So I always debate whether to give the presentation on this particular topic, because it's something you could pretty much read for yourself. But I usually end up with the conclusion, yeah, it's probably useful to go over it and discuss it. And especially if you're short on time, this way you can at least hear about it. So this is basically talking about some of the basic legal information you need to know as an engineer, I think it would be, and then some nuances that pop up with being for software contracts. And so basically, when you're commissioning a software, when someone commissions the software, or you're being commissioned to write some software, a software development agreement is warranted and necessary. You can see here, you want to make it a well-written contract that has basically what the roles and responsibilities and obligations are. So the most frequent areas of dispute between clients and developers is the timeline. So there should be a schedule in place in the contract and benchmarks or milestones, which is here in this paragraph here. The project should be clearly broken down in discrete parts or stages, often the phases are called milestones. And it's important to have these in order to facilitate delivery of an acceptable product. This makes it easier to see where you're at and to monitor whether both parties are living up to their part of the agreement as you go through the contract. You don't want to get to the end of the contract and then realize there's a problem. Just like software development or project management, you don't want to wait till the end to find out there's a problem. You want to try to catch it and correct it as early as possible. So advantage for a software client of doing it in phases is getting the work in phases avoids the danger of getting unsatisfactory product at the very end. Again, you want feedback provided to the provider early on in the process that they're going down the wrong path or their work is unacceptable. And so being able to give an opportunity to comment on the work will keep things moving forward on the schedule and hopefully keep it moving forward in the correct direction. The advantage for the developer is having the client sign off on each phase of the project is the best way to avoid unwarranted claims of non-performance or unsatisfactory performance by the client when the project is concluded. So basically this is saying we want to know ahead of time that what we're doing is not satisfactory or not what the customer wants, instead of getting to the end and having the client unhappy, holding out money. And so that's the next paragraph, is that it gives the opportunity to have partial payments. So generally payments are delivered with successful acceptance of work at a particular milestone. And the advantage here is that the developer is getting paid along the way at key points in the project. And so there is not the situation where they would get stiffed in the end and end up with nothing. They will at least get partial payments delivered on each of the milestones. Again, that's an important concept to keep in mind, is this concept of having milestones so that you can check the progress, and also the developer can get the advantage of making sure they get at least some of their payments and not getting a situation where they don't get paid at the end. And also for the client, in that they can monitor the software and provide feedback if the provider is going off course and not actually implementing something that will help the client out. So software specifications, more into details. Of course, software specification is key thing to have, a well-written software specification of what the software is going to do and what requirements need to be met for it to be considered satisfactory. The more complete the specifications, the less likelihood of misunderstandings. And the other thing here is, again, this is an area where if you write the specifications in a language that is familiar or is the language of your client, you have a much better chance of not having misunderstanding. And here, this paragraph talks about that, using a draft of the functional specification in non-technical language that the client can understand. Pictures can help. Prototypes are a very valuable tool to demonstrate to the client what you're planning on doing, and for the client to give feedback whether what you're doing is what they're expecting or whether it's not. Note that the prototype will not be the pure specification, because you can't put that in a legal contract and use it. So you actually have to have your requirement specification with pictures, but certainly a prototype would not be sufficient for the contract. So the other area is payment arrangements. There's basically two ways to pay the developer. One is an hourly rate known as time and materials, or the other is a lump sum agreement known as a fixed price agreement. So I've been involved with contracts on using both of these schemes, and certainly each has their pros and cons. So a time and materials contract is basically is the provider, the developer is paid for the time they spent on the project and any materials that they need to produce the software. The client pays the developer for the time spent and actual costs. So pretty straightforward. The payment scheme is often favored by developers, since the developer is assured a payment even if the project takes longer than originally anticipated. It also takes away the uncertainty and the risk of coming up with a bad estimate, because it is notoriously bad or difficult to come up with an accurate estimate of how long a particular project will take. And this shifts the risk away from the developer of actually how accurate their estimate is. So the time and materials agreement is a big advantage to the developer because the project can continue on beyond what the estimated time is, and you would still get paid for the work you do, as opposed to having to eat the costs of the additional labor involved, or any unexpected materials involved that you incur, and therefore losing your profitability. Do we have a question
So
coming up here? Yes.
Yeah, yes. What kind of materials would this be? Like, the only thing I'm envisioning is either hardware or like a license or something. And
Right.
wouldn't say
So
that as bill.
hardware and libraries. Let's see what other equipment. If you're actually, for instance, we're working on a project where a data acquisition system was being used for this particular apparatus, was supposed to do long-term testing on materials, and so the client had to get certain pieces of equipment in order to test the software. They would need to get specific meters and stuff that are readable by a computer, and they would have to interface to maybe a signal temperature signal reading device that was being used by us as the client. So those are kinds of things that they needed to purchase or borrow from us. Unfortunately, I don't think we had extras on hand. So that would be something that the client would have to buy, or the other possible solution, of course, is that we could have provided it, loaned it to them, and given it back. But those are the kinds of things. But there really is a large scope of different things that can be involved, depending on the type of project you're looking at. Okay, any other questions on that? So one of the things with times and materials, I said that there are huge advantages, and keep this in mind, it's very developer friendly, the time and materials agreement. But there is some advantages to the client, because here is a situation where the project can still complete or still go forward with full engagement of the developer, because you can imagine in a fixed price contract that the engagement of your provider would be somewhat limited if they know they're not being paid. So there you have some leverage, more leverage. If the project starts running up over time, since you're still paying them, you can still negotiate on that end. So there is some slight advantages for the client, but primarily the big advantages for the developers. The other is a fixed price agreement. And so under a fixed price agreement, the client pays the developer a fixed sum for the entire project. And this is based on the estimates that the client, that the developer gives the client. So the big advantage is, in theory, the payment scheme favors the client by providing certainty as to what the project will cost. And generally in the fixed price agreement, it also states a certain time frame. So basically the time and the cost is constrained by this. But in reality is, since projects tend to run over, there can be complications then when the project runs over and what happens in a fixed price agreement. So the payments are tied to progress of the developer's work. If the client substantial leverage to insist on timely and successful completion of the project because it's a fixed price, but generally, there is, as a practical matter, clients often agree to pay developers more money. The project takes more time than anticipated. Otherwise, the developer may just quit and just back out and quit without the client get anything. So that was what I was talking about in terms of some advantages of the time in materials agreement. Here, you could have possibly a hybrid agreement that says, okay, this is the course of action that will happen if it goes over the allotted time. Or if you've run over the allotted time, another agreement could be created that says, okay, we still want the software. We believe that you're close based on the deliverables you've given us this far, and we're willing to have a new contract to help in finishing it because we do want to get a finished product. So those, again, are the two major, is time and materials and fixed price. So another very interesting aspect of software project deliverables is who owns the copyright of the materials and who has the rights to the intellectual property that's created in the software. This is often a hotly contested issue between developer and client and can easily be a deal breaker, especially if the client is another software or has software development capabilities. Then this can become a big issue, especially if the client is planning on maintaining this software or extending the software after the software is provided or the deliverables are provided. So in general, the developers own the copyright to software unless the developer is the client's employee or the software is part of a larger work made for hire under a written agreement. In order to own the copyright, the client must have an agreement transferring ownership from the developer to the client. So there has to be something specifically in mind. Now, keep in mind that there are certain basic libraries that the provider might have in place that they don't want to give up complete ownership to, and there are certain maybe frameworks or techniques that the user may commonly use in other products as well than in all their products, and those kinds of things need to be figured out, whether maybe the client gets non-exclusive access to it, but we still retain ownership of the material. These are all things that need to be worked out to provide any issues later on in the cycle or even after the product is delivered. So the range of options here are sole ownership by the client to ownership by the developer, with the clients just merely having a license to use the software. And typically that would be in a lot of commercial products like the Microsoft products or any commercial software that you get off the shelf. And then there are many alternatives between these two extremes, depending on how much the money the developer is paid and how much they're willing to pay for these rights and how important those rights are to the continued business of the supplier. So here's sort of a caveat for software developers. Like I was alluding to earlier, there are normally various development tools, routines, subroutines, and other background technology that is integral to your work cycle that you use for providing software for all your clients. And so these basic background technologies you generally want to retain ownership of. Otherwise, when you start using those technologies, if you've sold the rights away, you're violating the ownership contract. So these are things that you want to make sure you think through as you're thinking about the design and how you might implement the software. What kinds of technology and things are things that you either already have existing that you will want to use for other projects, future projects, or things that you may develop that you see a use for in the future, that you envision building this and you can see that there would be a use case for using it in other systems that you typically create. So again, be careful about what some of the background technology that you will be providing and whether that will be included, as the rights to it or the copyright to it will be given to the client, or whether you will retain them yourself or something in between. So warranty provisions. So a warranty is a promise from the seller that the product will do what it's supposed to do for a specific or reasonable time period, and what the seller will fix or replace if it does not. As it says there, warranty provisions are included in most common software development contracts. However, since this is an area of active bargaining between developer and client, these provisions will vary widely. But this is an important thing to do, because in our last lecture, we talked about how support and maintenance of software is a significant portion of the cost involved in the implementation and life cycle of the software product, that the actual support costs can often exceed the amount of costs and time involved in the actual development of the product is the support. So as a provider, you certainly don't want to have that open-ended and bear the costs of supporting this product indefinitely. And on the other hand, if you are the client, you want to have some assurance that something won't come up that will make the software unusable within a reasonable period of time, that you can get support from the provider and the developer. So the warranty of the software are typically in the contracts. Yes, question.
Yeah, sorry.
Yeah.
I know the warranty time would depend on the size of the project and stuff like that, but what would you say is a good average time?
So actually, it's listed right here. So such warranties typically last from 90 days to 1 year if the software is developed. Beyond a year would be very atypical, especially in the initial quote. You may have like some type of addendum contract or something for software maintenance or support, where you're willing to pay the original developers time and materials for support, for instance, or a fixed price per year or something like that. But typically, the warranties will last from 90 days to a year, and I would say that over a year is very atypical of a contract, because that is starting to get to be starting to become a severe liability for the developer to have to continue to support the software without additional payment beyond that year. So did that answer your question, Ian?
Yes, thank you.
Yeah. So yeah, that was a very good question, and I'm noticing a typo here in this article. Yeah, so you want to developers want to avoid making promises that their software will work indefinitely, and again, we know that can be very hard to keep and very expensive, because one of the scenarios you could easily imagine is that it was written for a particular version of an operating system or particular hardware platform, and all of a sudden that hardware platform or that operating system becomes obsolete, and the customer may have to have some changes done to the software to support future versions of the hardware or operating system. So that would be just one example, but there are definitely many others. title and non-infringement. That title is meaning the client will get good title to software. Basically, they have rights to use it. And non-infringement means that we're not infringing on anyone else's copyrights, that you're not using someone else's intellectual property rights in the development of what you're providing. Let's see, there was something that and typically in fact, not even typically, I would say you always will have when you work for a large company or a company that develops software, you will have a header file, comment file that's standardized across the company that needs to be put on the top of every single source code file. This will be vetted by the lawyers that says, okay, this is the copyright notice. And so this template will have basic developer information that you want to have associated with, let's say, the class for a class file. But also it's going to have this copyright notice at the top that has been determined by the lawyers that will state that this is copyrighted by this company and they own exclusive rights to it, blah, 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 all the legal ramifications. So you will have the standard template. And so most IDEs support this in that functions and methods will have default headers that automatically pop up, or you could have a keyboard shortcut that has them pop up so that you're not typing in this legal agreement every time you're creating a software source file from scratch, typing it out. It'll be some type of template that will automatically get filled in. But this will typically be will be, I would say, at the top of every file that you create when you're out in the workforce. And then we have dispute resolution. This is pretty much standard contract law, but it's arbitration, which is you agree to have a third party render a decision outside of the court system. Mediation, again, less formal and cheaper means, or other types of things that will probably be in the contract on how disputes will be handled. So that's a basic rundown. I actually, unfortunately, was involved in a legal case where I had to provide, or actually my teammates and I had to all provide input into a particular contract situation where there was a split and a disagreement of the project, and it was interesting. It was kind of bizarre, some of the questions that were asked. For instance, one thing that just strikes me was that that one of the questions the lawyers asked me was, so I was working for Lawrence Livermore National Lab, a big government laboratory, and they said that for my timekeeping, that sometimes it would say 99.8% time was spent on this project, and sometimes it would say 101%. Basically the numbers would be spread out across the months unevenly, but they all ended up averaging out to 100%. Why was that? And I just kind of looked at the lawyers and say, I have no idea. I'm not an accountant. I have nothing to do with the timekeeping system at our company. I have no idea why that's the case. And the other bizarre thing was, why did they care? But anyway, that is sort of interesting, getting into a legal process. But you certainly want to have things in your contract that will help you. But again, make sure the things to keep in mind here is time and materials and fixed price contracts, and basically who owns the copyrights are important, things like that. So any questions?
One more.
Yeah.
So
You're Mr.
obviously,
Question Man today.
yeah, apparently.
Good. I'm glad.
So bigger companies are obviously going to have multiple lawyers to go through this.
Right.
But if you're an independent or contractor or small business doing a contract, would you recommend requiring a lawyer, or just would it be recommended, or not even entirely necessary as long as you're careful?
I would say you probably need a lawyer. So typically for a small business, you might have a legal plan. And if you have an opportunity, by the way, my last company I worked for had a legal plan that was provided that you could actually purchase purchase basically from a small monthly cost to you. You could get access to this legal plan, and I actually took advantage of it at this last company, and it's paid for itself in spades. Certainly, if you have a will or living trust, generally you recoup the cost right away, and so you could just do it for 1 year and then get your will and trust. For me, we've actually gone through multiple living wills and trusts and regular wills because of additional grandchildren's being born, so we're having to update our will for different grandchildren or changes in situations, in family situations, and then moving from California to Texas certainly made changes to our will necessary. So definitely a good thing to consider seriously if you're getting the opportunity to participate in a legal plan through your workplace in terms of a benefit. So just sort of an aside. Any other questions? Grady, and I'm glad you're thinking about these things, because these are things that you may want to think of. So Ian, are you thinking about doing consulting on your own at some point, or joining a small company?
Small company, but
Yeah.
my grandfather's a contractor consultant, so I was curious. But
yeah, that
honestly,
might be interesting to see what he does. But yeah, you could certainly, once you have the lawyer layout or have a template and a sort of a practice that you're doing consistently, you might be able to get away with it. But I'm certainly not going to recommend not having access to a lawyer with something as important like that. Yeah. Okay. So I'm going to minimize this, and we're going to pull up our. Uh-oh. Let's see how this works. I'm trying to transfer a screen over, and I have different resolution screens, and it's always a crapshoot about how it's going to transfer. I think it's easier to.
I'd say that's an accurate description of Windows DPI scaling.
Yeah.
I've specifically designed multiple of my systems to not have monitors that need to scale. It does not work properly.
So sometimes it works seamlessly, and there's no problem at all. And sometimes it's just like, I just can't get this to transfer over. I'm going to close it and see if I can get it to come up on the. Here we go. That looks like it's transferred over. I bring it up again and brought it up.
We still have the non-existent monitor bug. Like, a window can still get moved to a monitor that's invalid, and you just can't get it.
Can't get rid of it.
Like, you can force close it in Task Manager, and you can really hope that the same bug or a different bug where when you reopen a window, it doesn't remember where it was happens.
Right,
and it shows up on
and when you bring it up, it puts it back onto that non-existent screen again.
Yep.
And that's where you go hunting as a software developer, go hunting into the executable directories and look for the configuration file that possibly just shift plus left. Yeah, I think that is right.
That works. I think there's two separate ones, because that used to be how you do it, yeah, is that you had to select it on the taskbar and then really quickly select it and then Windows Shift left or right in order to jump it onto one of the main displays.
Right.
And then the Windows tab menu, you could also right-click on it if it shows up there and have it lock to a window or lock to a side, and it would usually work. But now I've also had cases where even that won't work.
Right.
So,
yeah.
Windows.
It's challenging, let's say at the least. So yeah, good strategy is to have same resolution monitors on everywhere, but sort of not an option. So I have the same resolution monitors for my two externals, but my laptop is actually a high res. We also have delete system 32. There you go.
Well, that will solve your problem. It'll cause a lot more, but it will solve your problem. You will not have a window open on another display anymore.
Yep.
You just won't have any windows.
So let's get a project status update from the Money Munchie team. So where are you at? Can one of the three of you give me a quick status update?
Yeah, I can provide that. So currently right now, Money Munchie has been divided into its separate user interfaces. And right now it has, I would say, about 80% of all the basic functions of this interfaces incorporated. The other 20% is just transferring that data or that packet of data and into the different types of user interfaces. So basically, the main problem of concern is just having the user interfaces communicate with each other.
Right. So any critical issues that need to be addressed to give you a comfortable feeling that so basically any risks that you see in completion of this project?
As far as risks, there is some embedded libraries that we're using, and I think the IDE that I'm currently using is called like Active State Komodo, and I'm just curious. I'll probably consider it when I'm doing different types of testing, making sure it runs on like different types of Python development environments.
Okay.
So that's probably one of the biggest risks, is just making sure it runs, and because the Komodo library has it already installed, and so it may have to include it, or like you might have to import the package into Python or other types of developments.
Right. But you would imagine that Python being an interpretive language, it would pretty much run on any system that Python runs on.
Yeah, that's my current assumption.
Right. But
I mean,
certainly
you
could.
Have you ever tried doing multiprocessing in Python on Windows?
A little
Don't.
bit, but it was fun.
Yeah, fun. Let's go with that.
Yeah, exactly.
Definitely not randomly executing code that shouldn't have even been executed.
Oh no, of course not.
Nah, worked perfectly fine.
Yeah.
During a test too, that was fun.
And would you say that it was the implementation of the Python interpreter, or would you say that was a characteristic of Python?
I mean, in that case, it was an error.
That.
In that case, it was an error of the Windows port of Python.
Yeah.
It didn't handle generating threads quite correctly, and there was just a bug to where, best I can tell, rather than it would generate a thread, and then rather than putting the code for that thread into some kind of a separate file or however it handles it, and then running it in that thread, it copied the entire contents of the program into the thread and executed that, which then generated another thread and copied its entire contents and basically just exploded and created infinite threads and then crashed.
So certainly you could think of various scenarios that you could do if that becomes a problem, right? You could
Linux VM.
Yeah, you could do a VM. You could descope it and say the supported platforms are only these, and we're going to eliminate a platform. These are
In that
all.
case, it was a test on a Py and Python class, so Linux.
Oh yes, yeah. Didn't have that option other than to go to Dr. Gowing and say, hey, this is not working right.
Yep.
That must have been fun. So you actually were doing that on a Raspberry Pi then during the exam then?
I believe in that case it was just running on Windows.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
Oh, right.
The Pi worked
Right.
fine
Yeah.
because Linux.
Right. Okay. And where are you in terms of your database and how you're going to store your data?
As far as storing data, the program itself has a lot of local functions, and it mainly just reads from the file as it gets updated. I'm not quite sure our current implementation is using any types of complex databases.
Right.
It would certainly help.
But most of your main information is in the Excel spreadsheets. Is that right? Is that
Correct? Yes.
okay? And so it's mostly configuration kinds of things that you'll be storing.
Yeah, it reads values from the Excel file, or in some cases, it's the I believe text file for the status report as well. And it would store those inside the program, and then make a list, and then it would take that list, put it into the printing function, and then write that to the Excel file.
Right. Okay. Well, let's go. Let's move on. Thank you for the status. So how about the finals checkers team? See, I see Jonathan's online and probably Ocheer. Oh, no, I don't see Ocheer. But so Jonathan, or either of you, if you're online, I didn't exhaustively look. Give me a quick update on where you are with your final checkers project.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay, so we've pretty much finished. The only things that we are doing are sort of quality of life sort of things. Like preferential decisions that we have to make. Not really sure that we have that much to do going forward.
So what do you mean by preferential decisions? Is that the scope of the requirements or what?
It's not in the scope of the requirements. For instance, we're deciding whether or not to have important pieces make 2 moves as a single move or not.
Oh, okay. So kind of what would make the game most enjoyable? Is that what we're talking about?
Right.
Yeah.
So this
Right.
would not be like, this would be sort of an after release kind of thing where you would get user feedback, what looks nicer, what feels better.
Right. Or you could even have variants, right? Game variants.
Right.
Some menu option you can choose a
I
variant.
would definitely pick a different branch to go from there.
Yeah, definitely. To avoid having undue effects on your currently working system.
Right.
So good. So you're starting to think about finishing up the documentation, test plan, test report, those kinds of things too, I imagine then.
I'm actually a little bit curious on the weekly report, because are you looking for a weekly report on every week that we've been working on this project?
No, just the ones going forward. So I think you gave a work activity log gave one last week, and so it would be since your last work activity log.
Right.
So yeah. All right. Yeah, go ahead.
I had one question about, you said screenshots?
Yeah, or a video clip of the function running, just sort of, or sometimes people will give snapshots of their source code repository or a particular piece of code that they're having problems with or whatever, or that they're working on and trying to figure out any sort of documentation or that you can show me about where you are. So certainly a video of your currently the behavior of your current system would be fun. But
Can we
anything along that
submit the
line.
current system?
Yeah, you could do that. That would work. And sort of give me a heads up on how to start and how do I go about using it. Yeah. that would
Double
be
click
fun.
the exe.
Okay. And should be self-explanatory, right?
Right.
Of the help functions. Okay. That's fine. All right. So we'll do one more. How about the Checkers emulator team A? So that's Isaac and Gabe. Where are you on your project?
Okay, well, I'll take this. So, we're working in tandem with Ethan and Caden and McKinnon, and at the moment, we've definitely done some looking into our implementation, but we haven't spent. It doesn't sound like we haven't spent anywhere near as much time actually writing kind of the foundation of the code as many of the other projects have. So we're planning on cutting out a fair amount of time this weekend to have the baseline functions going, but we really have a very solid plan for how we need to implement everything. So it should be pretty smooth in terms of the coding itself.
Right. Yeah. I think the key thing is resource management now then, right? It's how time and when you have time to do it, because you have a plan in place and you're pretty confident it'll work.
I think one of the things that we're going to need to be careful with is making sure that we have, I remember that we were talking about a requirements prioritization list, and I think that might be something that we need to do because we have a lot of potential scope for this project, and we go one step at a time.
Yeah. You were cutting in and out, so I only got part of it, but I'm hearing basically requirement scoping is one of the key concerns. Is that right?
Yes. I'll talk a little bit louder. Can you hear me?
You can hear. I can hear you fine. I think it's actually technical, because you're talking quite loud and I can hear you, but your voice, at least for me, will fade in and out in terms of anything, or it'll start getting garbled a little bit. So okay. I think it's solely a technology issue.
Well, I mean, maybe Isaac could give some comments if he wants to. I mean, if he doesn't want to, that's fine.
Yeah, I don't know. Yeah, we're gonna work hard during this weekend. I think our current plan is to focus primarily on getting the manual portion of the checkers done, meaning like get the GUI online, allow it to be player versus player. I've started building up some rudimentary ideas to get a CPU to work, and I have a fairly organized algorithm to do that. I haven't written it up yet or tested it yet, so it might fail horribly. But the goal right now is to focus on the manual portion, get that fully online, and then we'll work on CPUs, which is probably going to be the more fun part.
Yep. All right. Well, sounds great. So anyone have any questions? I'm going to go ahead and excuse you, but want to give you opportunity to ask any questions that you may have.
Are the slides for this lecture posted?
The slides are not in terms of the administrative slides. Is that what you're talking about? Or are you talking about the document? Because the document is available. Someone remind me where exactly it is in Canvas. It's in Canvas. I think it's in the modules.
I'll take a look and see.
Yeah, I think it's in the modules. Oh, I've got it right here in front of me. What am I doing? Oh, legal issues. It's this one here. It's this module here, legal issues, Nolo Press. And then it is a link to the PDF.
I see it.
Yeah. Any other questions? All right. Well, enjoy your day. We're getting close to the end. So a lot of your time now will primarily be after you've taken these last few quizzes or quiz maybe. Anyway, will be on your project. So.
Great.